I tried. I tried in every way to save what was left of my marriage. I know many might think it was in vain, that perhaps deep down I already knew what was happening, but the truth is, hope has a strange way of blinding us. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept that things had come to this point, but still, there I was, making one last effort, trying to save something that seemed to slip through my fingers more each day. It was an ordinary morning, my eyes still heavy with sleep, trying to gather the strength for another day. But in that moment, with him sitting in front of me, as calm as if he were talking about the weather, he uttered those words that still echo in my mind. "I don't love you anymore. I'm with another woman. She's more beautiful than you, and I'm going after what makes me happy." I couldn't react right away. My heart felt like it had stopped, the air grew thick, and my eyes filled with tears. How could something so simple, so direct, destroy everything I thought was true? In the past few days, I had tried everything. I sought to reconnect. I tried to understand what had gone wrong, what I could have done to avoid this point. But he had already made his decision. The pain of hearing that from him was like a sharp blade cutting through all the hopes I still had left. And the worst part? He didn't even seem to feel the pain I was in. That person, with whom I had spent years of my life, was now telling me that everything we built together meant nothing anymore. That man, who had been everything to me, was now leaving me, as if it was easy. If you've been through something similar, or if this story touched you in some way, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Stories like this, that make us reflect and look at our own lives, deserve to be shared. I remember it as if it were yesterday, the moment he turned to me, with the same calm expression as always, and said the words that still echo in my mind. I was standing in the kitchen, trying to prepare something quick for breakfast, as if it were just another ordinary day. But that day would not be ordinary. He sat at the table, and his gaze, something that had always been my refuge, was distant, as if he were already somewhere else. And it was in that heavy silence that he told me, "I don't love you anymore. I'm with another woman. She is more beautiful than you, and I am going after what makes me happy." The shock was so great that, for a second, the words didn't make sense. I stopped mid-movement, my hands still holding the cup of coffee, which began to tremble without me realizing it. It couldn't be, I thought. This couldn't be true. I looked at him, trying to understand, hoping he would laugh or say he was joking. But no. He was serious, so serious that he even seemed indifferent to the impact of those words on me. That sentence was like a punch in the stomach, like a cold blade cutting through all my certainties, all my dreams of a future together. The sense of abandonment was instant, but also a kind of emotional paralysis. I didn't know what to do, what to feel. I felt as if I had been transported to an unknown place, where the certainties I had about everything we lived disappeared. "She is more beautiful than you," he said, as if it were that simple. As if beauty were enough to destroy years of complicity, of moments we shared. I could only look at him in silence. I couldn't speak, couldn't scream, couldn't cry. What could be said after those words? What could I have done to avoid this? I tried to find some explanation, some excuse, something that made sense, but his words were hammering in my head endlessly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we went through, he simply decided to move on, with someone he thought was more beautiful. The pain of hearing that was indescribable. It was a pain that could not be rationalized. It was something visceral, something that reached the depths of the soul, and the worst part, he seemed so light. I know this must sound crazy to anyone on the outside, but what I wanted to know was, what would you do? How would you react if you were in my place? The pain is the same for all of us when what we built falls apart right in front of our eyes. I kept asking myself, over and over again, what I should have done, what I could have said to change it. Maybe I got lost somewhere. Or maybe he was the one who got lost from me. Tell me in the comments if you've ever gone through something like this, if you've ever felt invisible in such a cruel way. What would you do? I truly want to know. And it all happened so suddenly. As if, in a matter of minutes, my life had turned upside down. The man with whom I built a life, someone I shared so much with, was now saying I meant nothing to him anymore. Or, at least, not enough for him to make an effort. She is more beautiful than you. Those words repeated in my head like an echo that wouldn't stop. I didn't know what to do, what to say. The only thing left was to retreat, to step away and try to process all of it. Because at that moment, there was no more room for discussions, for explanations. He had already made his choice. And as much as I tried to fight against it, the only truth I could see was that he didn't love me anymore. The tears began to fall. Not because he was with another woman, not because he traded me for someone more beautiful, but because in that moment I realized he had been gone from me for a long time. The promises he made, the hopes I still held on to that he would come back to me, all of it crumbled in a second. I saw myself there, in that kitchen, completely alone, not knowing where to go or what to do. The love I thought existed, that I believed still existed, vanished. The pain of realizing he no longer cared was almost unbearable. I tried to understand what was happening. I tried to find some reason that justified that attitude, that cold decision. But I found none. And the worst part was that he didn't seem remorseful, didn't seem to care about the pain he was causing me. He just wanted to move on. And that was the cruelest part. It wasn't just the replacement by another woman. It wasn't just the feeling of being substituted, but his indifference. That indifference was what destroyed me the most. But what could I do? What could I say? The only thing left was to retreat, to step back and try to process it all. Because at that moment, there was no more space for discussions, for explanations. He had already made his choice. And no matter how much I tried to fight it, the only truth I could perceive was that he no longer loved me. When he left the room after that conversation, the silence that remained was heavier than his words. It felt as though the walls of the house had closed in on me, trapping me in an emptiness I couldn't escape. I sat down on the edge of the bed later that night, staring at the floor, unable to process how quickly my life had been overturned. I tried to find comfort in the familiar details of the house, the photos on the wall, the worn-out pillow on the couch, but everything seemed to mock me. Every corner whispered his absence. Every object reminded me of the life we had built together. And now, it all felt like ruins. In those first days, the loneliness became unbearable. I would wake up in the middle of the night, instinctively reaching for his side of the bed, only to find it cold and empty. That emptiness hurt more than anything else, because it reminded me that I had been replaced, discarded, and left behind without even the dignity of a farewell filled with emotion. There was no fight, no pleading on his part, no hesitation, just his decision to leave me for someone else. It made me question everything about myself. I started to wonder if I had ever been enough for him, if all the moments we shared were genuine, or if he had been emotionally gone long before he confessed the truth. It was tormenting to replay conversations, to analyze small gestures, to search for the clues I had missed. Maybe I had chosen not to see them. Maybe I had blinded myself with hope, convincing myself that love could withstand distance, silence, or indifference. Now, in the aftermath, I was left with nothing but questions. The days blurred together in an exhausting cycle of pain. I avoided mirrors because every time I looked at myself, I could hear his words echoing. "She is more beautiful than you." Those words became a poison, corroding my self-worth, making me doubt every detail about my body, my face, my presence. I would stand in front of the mirror, studying the lines on my skin, the tiredness in my eyes, and I could not stop comparing myself to an image of a woman I had never even met. She wasn't real to me, but she haunted me more than any ghost ever could. And what hurt the most was not just being replaced, but realizing that he didn't even try to soften the blow. His indifference carried more cruelty than anger ever could. He left me feeling invisible, as if the years I had given, the sacrifices I had made, the love I poured into us had all been erased in an instant. In my solitude, I tried to hold on to something, anything, that could help me make sense of it. I prayed at night, whispering questions into the dark, but the silence only echoed back. I thought about calling friends, about telling them what had happened, but every time I picked up the phone, I froze. How could I explain this without sounding pathetic? How could I make them understand the hollow space that had opened inside me? I was ashamed of being abandoned, ashamed of not being enough, ashamed of still loving someone who had already chosen another path. Loneliness is not just the absence of someone's presence. It is the realization that you no longer matter to them, that your existence no longer carries weight in their world. That realization destroyed me. I wandered through the house like a shadow, unable to eat, unable to sleep, waiting for a message that never came. My mind kept imagining him with her, smiling, talking, holding her hand. That vision burned me from the inside, and yet I couldn't stop tormenting myself with it. The loneliness was not only physical but emotional. It was the cruel reminder that I had been replaced in a space where I once thought I was irreplaceable. I realized that in the midst of despair, silence becomes the loudest companion. It screamed at me during the nights. It mocked me in the mornings. It suffocated me in the afternoons. Each hour felt endless, each moment an unbearable reminder of my isolation. The house that once sheltered our love had now turned into a grave of broken promises, and I was the ghost wandering through it. In the days that followed, I found myself trapped in a haze of confusion, trying to piece together a version of reality that made sense. It was as if everything I knew, everything I believed in, had been turned upside down, and I was left struggling to find the ground again. But slowly, and with great effort, I started to realize that the only way through the pain was to accept it. At first, acceptance felt like defeat. It felt like surrendering, like giving up on the last shred of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would change his mind. But every time I thought about the life we shared, every time I replayed his words in my head, I understood that there was no room for hope anymore. There was no room for what-ifs. I couldn't keep living in a space where he no longer existed, not in the way I had once known him. I could feel the shift within me, a subtle but undeniable change. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. I spent countless nights crying myself to sleep, asking why. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my heart aching with every breath, and the tears seemed endless. Yet, as the days passed, I began to realize that this pain was part of the process. It wasn't a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. I was finally allowing myself to feel the hurt, to let it flow through me, instead of trying to bury it under the layers of denial. The acceptance didn't come with an immediate sense of peace. It didn't come with a sudden realization that everything would be okay. No, it came quietly, with a deep understanding that this chapter was over, and no amount of wishing could rewrite it. There was something strangely freeing about that. It wasn't the kind of freedom that was accompanied by a sense of triumph, but the kind that arrived like a soft whisper in the back of my mind, telling me it was okay to move forward. I started to focus on the little things, the small moments that brought me comfort. The warmth of a cup of tea in the morning, the peaceful silence of the early hours before the world woke up, the quiet satisfaction of completing a task I had set out to do. These small moments were the building blocks of my healing. They didn't erase the pain, but they gave me a foundation to stand on. It felt like starting over, like rediscovering who I was without him. I wasn't just a wife anymore. I was someone who had been through something incredibly difficult and was still standing. I didn't know who I would become in the end, but I knew I couldn't keep holding on to a version of myself that no longer fit. It was painful to realize that I had become so entwined in him, in the us, that I had forgotten who I was on my own. And now, in this silence, in this space where he no longer had a place, I was beginning to rediscover myself. The woman who had once been lost in the idea of a perfect life was slowly starting to find her way back. I would never be the same. The person I was before this heartbreak would no longer exist. But I had to accept that. I had to embrace this new version of myself, the one who would rise from the ashes of everything I had once believed in. I knew there would still be moments of doubt, moments when the grief would feel too heavy to bear, but the important thing was that I was moving forward. I wasn't stuck in the past anymore. It wasn't easy. It was exhausting, emotionally draining, and at times, it felt like I would never truly be free of the hurt. But I knew that by accepting it, I was opening the door to healing. And in that healing, I would find the strength to move forward, even if I didn't know what the future would look like. I wasn't sure when it would happen, but I knew that one day I would look back on this and realize that this was the moment I started to rebuild. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope for what might come next. And while it wasn't the hope of rekindling a lost love, it was the hope of finding my own path again. Healing is not a straight line. It doesn't happen in one swift motion, like a wound that magically disappears with time. Instead, it's messy, uneven, and often painful in ways I never anticipated. The days started blending together again, each one seemingly the same as the last, and for a while, I couldn't escape the sense of numbness. I would go through the motions, making meals, taking care of the house, pretending that everything was fine. But inside, it felt like I was living in a fog, struggling to breathe, to find my footing in a world that no longer felt familiar. The hardest part wasn't just the loneliness, it was the quiet realization that the life I had built was no longer mine. I had always believed that love was something you could rely on, something you could trust, but in the end, love turned out to be fragile, something that could shatter without warning. The love I had given, the time I had spent believing we were building something lasting, felt like a cruel joke. But the pain, no matter how sharp, started to change. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't obvious at first, but over time, I could feel the grip of sorrow loosening. I started finding moments of peace again. Little moments that I could hold on to, like a walk in the park where the sun felt warm on my skin, or reading a book for the first time in weeks without feeling the weight of my sadness. Those moments were the first signs that healing was possible, even if it was slow. I began to reconnect with parts of myself that had been lost, my passions, my interests, the things that made me feel alive before him. I started spending time with friends again, even though it felt awkward at first. It felt like a long time since I had laughed with someone who wasn't him. But with every conversation, with every small connection, I began to remember who I was before him, before this pain took over. I began to feel like I was reclaiming pieces of myself that had been buried under the weight of his absence. And yet, as I moved forward, I couldn't help but think about how much I had changed in such a short time. I had been so sure of the future, so certain that we would grow old together, that I had neglected the most important person in my life, myself. I had gotten lost in the we, in the idea of our shared future, and in doing so, I had forgotten who I was. Now, as I stood on my own, I was learning to rebuild myself from the ground up. It wasn't easy. There were days when the sadness would return, when the emptiness would consume me, and I would find myself once again crying in the quiet of the night, unable to understand why things had turned out this way. But even in those moments, I reminded myself that I had survived the worst of it. I had made it through the revelation, through the unbearable silence, through the deep loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. And now I was finding my way back. I wasn't the person I was before all of this, but I was becoming someone new. And somehow, that person was starting to feel like enough. Slowly, I was learning that healing didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending that the past hadn't happened. It simply meant finding a way to carry those memories with me without letting them define me. I wasn't perfect and I didn't have all the answers, but I was learning how to move forward with what I had, to build a life for myself that didn't depend on someone else's love to feel whole. The process was slow, but it was progress. And for the first time in a long time, I could see a glimmer of a future that was mine, one that didn't rely on a man who had chosen to walk away. It was mine to create, mine to shape. And that realization, however small, gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. I was healing piece by piece. It's a strange thing, confronting the truth. When you first hear it, it feels like a slap in the face, something you weren't prepared for, something that shakes the ground beneath your feet. But as time passes, as you sift through the layers of denial and pain, the truth begins to settle. Not in the way you would hope, with clarity or relief, but in a way that forces you to face it, whether you're ready or not. The truth wasn't just that he didn't love me anymore, or that he had chosen someone else. It was deeper than that. The truth was that I had been living in a version of reality that wasn't true at all. I had been so caught up in the idea of us, in the image of a perfect marriage, that I hadn't noticed the cracks. I hadn't seen the signs. And even when they were right in front of me, I chose to ignore them because the idea of losing him, of losing US, was more terrifying than facing the reality that maybe he never truly cared the way I did. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been living in a lie. We had built a life together, yes, but it wasn't a life that was built on mutual love and respect. It was a life that I had constructed in my mind, a life that was convenient and comfortable, but not real. It was a life where I had convinced myself that everything would be fine, as long as I tried hard enough, as long as I loved enough, as long as I put in enough effort. But the truth was, I couldn't fix what was already broken. I couldn't rebuild something that had been damaged beyond repair. And that hurt. It hurt in a way that nothing else had. The realization that I had wasted so much time trying to save something that wasn't worth saving, it felt like a betrayal, not just from him, but from myself. How had I allowed myself to stay in a relationship that no longer served me? How had I allowed myself to believe that someone who didn't truly love me could ever be the right person for me? The truth forced me to confront my own choices, my own fears, and my own desires. It wasn't just about him anymore.
It was about me.
It was about the person I had become, the person I had allowed myself to be, for the sake of a relationship that never truly valued me. As I sat with that truth, it was like a weight lifted off my chest, but at the same time, the pain of it settled deeper into my bones. I realized that the hardest thing wasn't the betrayal, it wasn't the abandonment, it was the realization that I had been complicit in my own unhappiness. I had let my love for him blind me to my own worth, to the things that truly mattered. I had put so much of myself into the relationship that I had lost sight of who I was, of what I deserved, of what I truly needed. And now, as I stood on the other side of it, the truth was clear. The love I had given him was not wasted. It had shaped me, it had taught me, and it had shown me who I was capable of being. But it wasn't enough to make up for the lies, the deceit, and the indifference. And that was something I had to accept. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't undo what had been done. But I could choose to move forward. I could choose to take the lessons I had learned, painful as they were, and use them to create a better future for myself. And that, more than anything, was the hardest pill to swallow. I had to let go. Let go of the dream of a perfect marriage, let go of the image of us, and let go of the belief that love was enough to fix everything. The truth was that love alone wasn't enough. And in that truth, I found the strength to start again. It's strange how the heart works. How, after everything, it can still long for someone who has chosen to walk away. I never imagined it would take me so long to truly understand the concept of letting go. I had always thought it was just about pushing the memories away, about erasing the feelings that held me captive. But letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about acceptance. And acceptance doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, and even though I had spent so many nights crying, so many days feeling empty and lost, there was still a part of me that held on to the hope that things could go back to how they were. But reality was a cruel teacher, and with each passing day, I understood more and more that I couldn't change the past. I couldn't make him love me again. I couldn't force him to come back. And as much as I wanted to, as much as I wished it, I had to face the fact that the relationship I thought we had wasn't real anymore. It had been replaced with something else, something new, something that didn't include me. It was the hardest thing to accept, harder than the betrayal, harder than the loneliness, because it meant I had to confront the truth that I had been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed. I had been holding on to a love that wasn't returned, to a future that wasn't going to happen. But I couldn't keep clinging to the past because it was dragging me down. I couldn't keep pretending that things were going to be okay when I knew, deep down, that they never would be the same. And that's when I finally understood that letting go wasn't just about him. It was about me. It was about freeing myself from the chains of this heartbreak, from the constant replaying of our memories, from the idea that I could somehow fix everything. I couldn't fix it. It was broken, and no amount of wishing, no amount of crying would change that. Letting go meant taking back my power. It meant choosing to heal, even if it was painful, even if it felt impossible. It meant accepting that the love we shared was gone, but that I was still here. I was still alive. I was still worthy of love, of happiness, of a future, that was mine to create. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It wasn't a bright, shining hope. It was small, quiet, and fragile, but it was there. It was the hope that I could still find joy again, that I could still learn to love myself, that I could build a life outside of the one I had imagined with him. Letting go wasn't easy. It wasn't a one-time decision. It was a daily choice, a constant reminder to myself that I was worth more than the pain I had been carrying. But every time I made that choice, I felt stronger. And slowly, the weight of the past began to feel lighter. I was no longer defined by the love I had lost. I was defined by the strength I was finding within myself. If you're going through something similar, if you've ever had to let go of someone or something you thought you couldn't live without, know that you're not alone. It's one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do, but it's also one of the most important. Letting go is not about giving up. It's about giving yourself the chance to heal, to grow, and to move forward. It's about finding peace in the middle of the storm. If you've found some solace in these words, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. We're here to share stories, to keep the voices of those who've suffered alive, and to remember that healing is a journey we don't have to take alone. Please take a moment to comment below. Let us know how you've dealt with letting go, or if you're still in the process. Your story matters, and it's important that we keep these conversations going. Together, we can create a community that values healing, strength, and the beauty of moving forward. Also, don't forget to explore other stories on the channel, especially those in the playlist. The link will be in the description or in the pinned comments. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Your presence here means more than words can express.